when 5 Marines on a routine training exercise stumbled upon armed smugglers in the remote Cascade Ridge Mountains. They had minutes before being surrounded and eliminated. Their desperate radio call went unanswered. Help was an hour away, and they had maybe 10 minutes to live. But someone else heard that transmission. A woman living alone in a cabin 3 miles away. Someone who buried her Marine uniform and sniper rifle 3 years ago after a mission that still haunted her nightmares. Someone who'd sworn she'd never pick up a weapon again until she heard a young Marine's voice calling for help and recognized it was a sister of the man she'd failed to save. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The axe blade bit deep into the pine log, splitting it clean down the middle with a satisfying crack that echoed off the surrounding forest. Laura Sheffield straightened, wiping sweat from her forehead despite the cool mountain air that carried the scent of evergreen and approaching autumn. The woodpile beside her cabin had grown significantly over the past 2 hours, enough to last through the coming winter if she kept at this pace. Physical labor helped. It always had. When her hands were busy and her muscles ached, the memories stayed where they belonged, buried deep and quiet. NSH set another log on the chopping block, raised the axe, and froze mid-swing. Static crackled from inside the cabin, followed by a voice distorted by distance and interference. The old military radio she kept on the shelf, mostly out of habit, partly because Tyler insisted she maintain some connection to the outside world, had picked up something. Laura lowered the axe slowly, her pulse quickening in a way that had nothing to do with exertion. Nth's voice came again, clearer this time. Young male, urgent, any station, any station. This is Bravo 2 Actual. We have a situation at Grid November Delta 7342. Repeat, we need immediate assistance. Multiple armed hostiles. We are pinned down. Laura's breath caught. She dropped the axe and moved toward the cabin, her legs covering the distance faster than her mind could process what she was hearing. The radio sat on a dusty shelf between a collection of field guides and a photograph she rarely looked at anymore. She grabbed it, her thumb hovering over the transmit button. Don't, a voice in her head warned. Not your problem. Not your fight anymore. Bravo to Actual. This is Sierra 17. Another voice responded through the static. We copy your situation. Hold your position. QRF is spinning up now. ETA 45 to 60 minutes. 60 minutes. The first voice, younger than Laura had initially thought, maybe mid-20s, came back tight with barely controlled fear. Negative. Negative. We don't have 60 minutes. We got maybe 10 before they move on our position. We need end transmission, dissolved into static. Then silence. Laura stood motionless, the radio clutched in her hand. 45 to 60 minutes. She knew these mountains better than anyone except maybe Tyler. She knew exactly where Grid November Delta 7342 was located. Broken Ridge Canyon, a narrow box canyon surrounded by steep walls and limited egress points. If someone was trapped there with hostiles closing in, an hour might as well be a lifetime. NSH set the radio down carefully as if it might explode and walked to the window. The Cascade Ridge Mountains stretched endlessly before her, their peaks touched with early snow that wouldn't melt until spring. Beautiful, isolated, safe. She had chosen this place specifically because it was far from everything. Far from the Marines, far from the memories, far from the person she used to be. Nchar reflection stared back from the glass. 35 years old, auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Green eyes that had seen too much. She looked like a wilderness guide now, which was exactly what she'd become. No uniform, no rank, no responsibility for anyone's life but her own. Nth radio crackled again. Cameron, they're moving up the western slope. A woman's voice this time. Professional but strained. I count 8, maybe 10. We're not going to be able to hold this position. Copy that, Collins. Tighten the perimeter. Mitchell, how's Tucker? He's okay, Corporal. Twisted ankle, but he can move if we need to. Laura's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the window sill, forcing herself to breathe slowly. This wasn't her problem. She'd left that life behind. She'd earned the right to walk away, to be left alone with her guilt and her nightmares and her carefully constructed isolation. In Biu, even as she thought it, her feet were carrying her toward the bedroom closet. Empty duffel bags sat in the back corner where she'd shoved it 3 years ago, buried under winter clothes and extra blankets. Laura pulled it out, her hands moving with muscle memory older than conscious thought. The bag was heavier than she remembered. She unzipped it slowly, as if something dangerous might escape. Enchar uniform stared back at her, neatly folded. Beneath it, tactical vest, scope, ammunition, and wrapped in an oilcloth that smelled faintly of gun solvent, her M40A6 sniper rifle. She hadn't touched any of it since the day Dr. Phyllis Graham had sat across from her in that sterile office and gently suggested that perhaps Laura had given enough to Marines that perhaps it was time to give herself permission to heal. The recommendation for discharge had been couched in clinical language about PTSD and survivors' guilt and readjustment difficulties. But Laura had understood the real message. She was broken, and broken people didn't belong in the field. Nth radio erupted with another burst of transmission. All Bravo 2 elements pull back to the eastern rocks. We're getting flanked on both sides. Anybody copy? We need help now. Laura's hands closed around the rifle before she consciously decided to pick it up. The weight felt wrong and right simultaneously. Too familiar. Too comfortable. Too much like coming home to a place she'd spent 3 years trying to forget. An H phone buzzed. Tyler's name appeared on the screen. Please tell me you're not listening to that military frequency. Her brother said, without preamble. How did you? Because I'm listening to it, too. And I know you keep that old radio around. Laura, whatever you're thinking, don't. NSH cradled the phone against her shoulder, while her hands checked the rifle automatically. Barrel clear, action smooth, scope intact. There are Marines trapped in Broken Ridge Canyon. Help won't reach them in time. That's not your responsibility anymore. There had died Tyler, and a long pause. She could hear him breathing on the other end. Could picture him in his ranger station, probably staring at his own maps of the mountains they both knew so well. How long would it take you to get there? He finally asked, his voice resigned. 15 minutes if I push hard through Miller's Pass. 20 if I go the long way around. She was already pulling on her old tactical pants. Surprised they still fit. I can reach a vantage point overlooking the canyon in 25. Laura, this isn't like guiding tourists through safe trails. If they're armed hostiles, I know what there are. She grabbed the vest, began loading magazines. 40 rounds, 60. Her hands move faster now, driven by something deeper than thought. I know exactly what I'm walking into. Then you know this is insane. Probably. She paused, phone pressed her ear, and allowed herself one moment of honesty. I can't let them die, Ty. Not if there's something I can do. Is this about what happened in Kabul? Empty name of the city. Hit her like a physical blow. She closed her eyes, saw Danny Harper's face smiling at her from across a rooftop, heard his voice in her ear, saying he had her 6. Always had her 6. Right up until the moment the intelligence was wrong, and the enemy was where they weren't supposed to be. And Danny was, I have to go. She said, wait. If you're really doing this, and I can't believe I'm saying this, you'll need someone to coordinate with emergency services. Give me 5 minutes to call Deputy Cole and Captain Moore. If you're going to play hero, at least let's try to keep you alive. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just don't get yourself killed. Mom would never forgive me. And I'm not explaining to her that I helped you run toward danger. Nth line went dead. Laura finished dressing, pulled her hair back tighter, and grabbed the rifle. The weight settled across her shoulders like a memory made physical. She caught sight of herself in the mirror. No longer a wilderness guide, no longer quite civilian, not quite the Marine she used to be. Something in between, something necessary. Empty drive to the trailhead took 6 minutes, her old Jeep handling the rough forest roads with practiced ease. She parked where the vehicle tracks ended and the real wilderness began, grabbed her gear, and started moving. NTH mountains rose around her, familiar as her own heartbeat. She'd hiked these trails hundreds of times in the past 3 years, had learned every ridge and valley, every shortcut and hidden path. That knowledge pulled her forward now, her legs eating up distance, while her mind calculated angles and positions, and the 100 small factors that separated a successful shot from a disaster. Miller's pass was steep, but direct. She pushed through underbrush, still wet with morning dew, her boots finding purchase on rocks she'd memorized long ago. Her breathing fell into the rhythm of movement, in for 3 steps, out for 3 steps, never breaking stride. The rifle across her back barely registered as weight anymore. She was 23 again, training at Quantico. She was 28, deployed overseas. She was every age she'd ever been when the rifle mattered more than anything else in the world. NH all the way up the pass. Her radio crackled with a new voice. And bravo to Actual. This is Camp Redwood. Captain Moore speaking. Understand you have hostile contact. QRF is en route, but we're tracking 40-minute ETA minimum. Can you hold position, sir? Negative. We got confirmed hostiles on 3 sides, and we're running low on ammunition. Private Tucker is injured. Request permission to attempt breakout to the east. And negative, Corporal Wells. That terrain is too exposed. You'll be cut down before you cover 50M. Hold your position. We're doing everything we can to expedite. Laura recognized the name Moore. Captain Vincent Moore, relatively new to Camp Redwood, but with a solid reputation. She'd never met him during her service, but Tyler had mentioned him a few times. Good man, her brother had said, actually cares about his people. NSH crested the pass and paused to catch her breath, scanning the terrain ahead. From here, it was another 10 minutes to Echo Point, the highest overlook above Broken Ridge Canyon. If she could reach that position, she'd have clear sight lines into the canyon. She'd be able to see what was happening. What she'd be able to do about it was another question entirely. NH phone buzzed again. Tyler and Deputy Cole is on his way with whatever backup he can scramble. Captain Moore knows something's happening, but doesn't have details yet. I didn't mention you specifically. Good. And Laura, I pulled up the reports. Those Marines stumbled onto something big. Looks like a smuggling operation. Weapons, maybe people. The hostiles aren't going to just let them walk away. I know these aren't insurgents in Afghanistan. This is U.S. soil. If you shoot someone, and I'll deal with the consequences later. She started moving again faster now. Right now, those Marines need to stay alive long enough for consequences to matter. NSH terminated the call and pocketed the phone. The trees thinned as she climbed higher, giving way to rocky terrain and exposed granite. Echo Point jutted out like a ship's prow, offering an unobstructed view of Broken Ridge Canyon 200M below and 800M distant. Perfect range for her rifle, perfect position for what she needed to do. Laura dropped to a crouch as she approached the point. Moving slowly now, carefully, she settled into position behind a cluster of boulders, pulled the rifle around, and extended the bipod. The scope came up to her eye with a familiar weight of ritual and routine. Nth Canyon spread out below, and her heart sank, and 5 Marines huddled behind an inadequate outcropping of rocks on the canyon floor, their desert camouflage standing out against the darker mountain stone. She could see their positions clearly, 2 at the front providing cover, 2 in the middle, 1 in the back likely treating the injured Private Tucker Tyler had mentioned. They looked so young. They looked like children playing at war. Surrounding them, moving with tactical precision through the rocks and scattered pine trees, were at least 15 armed men. Not children. Not playing. These moved like professionals, covering angles, communicated with hand signals, establishing a perimeter that would soon become a killing box. Laura's hands tightened on the rifle. 15-1. 5 untested Marines against 15 experienced fighters who clearly had done this before. The math was brutal and simple. NSH dialed in the range, adjusting for wind and elevation. 800M, difficult, but manageable. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So, if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The afternoon sun was at her back, which meant it would be in the eyes of anyone looking her direction. Small advantages. She'd take everyone she could get, and through the scope, she focused on the Marines. The corporal, Wells they called him, was maybe 24, trying hard to look confident while his eyes betrayed his fear. One of the women, older than the others, lay on her side with blood on her shoulder. The Sergeant Collins, the injury looked serious, but not immediately fatal. And then Laura's breath caught, her finger freezing on the trigger guard. One of the Marines shifted position, and Laura got a clear look at her face through the scope. Young, maybe early 20s. Dark hair tucked under her helmet. Determination in her jaw that Laura recognized as the force of physical blow. Madison Harper, Danny's little sister. Last time Laura had seen Madison Harper, she'd been 19 years old, sitting in the front row at her brother's funeral with dry eyes and a folded flag in her lap. Laura had stood in the back, unable to face the family, unable to explain how she'd failed to bring Danny home. She'd left before the reception, driven straight back to base, and requested the discharge that Dr. Graham had been suggesting for months. Now, Danny's little sister was trapped in a canyon with death closing in from all sides, and Laura was the only person in position to do anything about it. NH hands were shaking. She forced her breathing to slow, forced herself to think tactically instead of emotionally. 15 hostiles. She had 40 rounds immediately available, another 60 in reserve. She couldn't take them all, but she didn't need to. She just needed to change the math enough that the Marines could hold until proper help arrived. Nth radio at her hip crackled. And Bravo 2, be advised. QRF is wheels up. 28 minutes to your position. Copy that. Wells responded. His voice had lost the edge of panic, replaced by grim acceptance. We'll do what we can. And 28 minutes. Laura scanned the hostile positions through her scope. They were moving faster now, tightening the noose. The Marines had maybe 5 minutes before the shooting started in earnest, maybe 10 before it ended. NSH had a choice to make. NSH could stay hidden. She could watch. She could wait for the QRF to arrive and hope it wasn't too late. She could maintain the civilian life she'd built, the safety of distance and non-involvement. She could avoid becoming the person she'd spent 3 years trying to stop being. Nor she could do what she'd trained half her life to do. Laura settled her breathing, found the calm place at the center of her chest where fear and doubt couldn't reach. Her finger moved the trigger. Through the scope, she tracked the hostile closest to Marine's position. A man maybe 40 years old, moving with military precision, rifle at ready. He was giving hand signals to others, coordinating the assault. Leader, or at least field commander. I'm sorry, Danny, she whispered to the ghost she carried everywhere. I couldn't save you. Maybe I can save her. Nth rifle felt like an extension of her body, natural as breathing. She'd made shots like this 1,000 times on ranges, and 100 times when lives depended on it. 800M, mild crosswind from the west. Target moving slowly. She led him by a fraction, accounting for bullet drop and drift. End shot broke clean and perfect, and through the scope, she saw the hostile drop like a puppet with cut strings. The sound of the shot echoed across the canyon a moment later, rolling like thunder off the stone walls. NF3 heartbeats. Everything stopped. The hostiles froze, trying to locate the shooter. The Marines went silent, confusion evident in their body language. Laura was already tracking her second target, a man moving up the western slope toward the Marines. Flank. She adjusted for the slightly longer range, controlled her breathing, and fired. Another hostile down. Now the canyon erupted into chaos. The hostiles scattered, diving for cover, shouting to each other. The Marines pressed themselves lower behind their rocks. And somewhere in the distance, Laura heard the blessed sound of helicopter rotors growing louder. NSH worked methodically, shot by shot, picking targets who presented themselves. A man exposing himself to get a better angle on the Marines. Another trying to flank from the east. A third who made the mistake of standing to bark orders. Each shot carefully placed. Each decision weighed in microsecond. She wasn't trying to kill everyone, just enough to keep the Marines alive, to make the hostiles think twice, to buy precious minutes. NH radio burst to life with frantic chatter. And what the hell is happening? Where's that fire coming from? Bravo 2. Do you have support we don't know about? Negative. Negative. We don't know who's shooting, but they're hitting the hostiles, not us. Captain Moore's voice cut through the confusion, authoritative and calm. All stations, QRF is 3 minutes out. Bravo 2, keep your heads down. Unknown shooter. If you can hear this frequency, you're saving lives. Keep doing what you're doing. Laura allowed herself a grim smile and continued working. 11 hostiles remaining. 10-9. They were breaking now, falling back toward a dirt road, barely visible through the trees where vehicles were parked. They had overwhelming force and the element of surprise. But now they faced an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't locate, couldn't fight. The smart ones were running. NTWO figures remained static through her scope, one giving orders, one beside him. She focused on the commander, a man in his mid-40s with the bearing of someone who'd seen combat. He wasn't running. He was scanning the ridge lines, searching for her position. Smart, dangerous. Their eyes met through 800M and a rifle scope. NFO. One impossible moment. Laura felt certain he saw her. Truly saw her despite the distance and concealment. Then he moved, grabbing the person beside him. A woman, Laura realized, younger and clearly terrified, and retreating toward the vehicles. Ench tracked him but didn't fire. The immediate threat had ended. The Marines were safe. The helicopters were close enough now that she could see them. 2 Blackhawks coming in low and fast. Laura lowered the rifle, suddenly exhausted. Her hands were steady, her breathing controlled. But inside she was shaking with adrenaline and something deeper. The recognition that she just crossed back over a line she'd sworn never to cross again. Below, the Marines emerged from cover cautiously, weapons still raised. The QRFS roped down, securing the perimeter. She watched Madison Harper stumble slightly, caught by one of her fellow Marines, and relief so intense it was almost painful wash through Lauren alive. Danny's little sister was alive. Unknown shooter, this is Captain Moore. If you're still on this frequency, I need you to identify yourself and your position. What you did here today saved lives, but we need to talk. Laura didn't respond. She began breaking down her position, packing up spent brass, erasing evidence of her presence. By the time anyone thought to search Echo Point, she'd be gone. NH phone rang. Tyler, please tell me that wasn't you shooting, he said without hope. I need to get back to the cabin. Can you create some confusion about where those shots came from? Laura, please. Ty Long sigh. I'll do what I can, but this isn't over. People are going to have questions. I know. She shouldered her rifle and started back down the trail, moving fast now. But for now, those Marines are alive. That has to be enough. NSH ended the call and focused on the descent, her mind already racing ahead to consequences and complications. She'd saved 5 lives today. She'd also exposed herself, revealed skills that would raise questions she wasn't ready to answer. And somewhere in those mountains, armed smugglers knew someone had cost them their prize and possibly their operation. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But as Laura made her way back through the forest, toward her cabin and her carefully constructed civilian life, she allowed herself one small moment of peace. Today, she'd been enough. Today, no one had died because she failed them. And today, she'd saved Danny's little sister. Whether that was redemption or just the first step toward it, she didn't know. But for now, in this moment, it was something Laura's hands didn't start shaking until she was halfway back to the cabin. The adrenaline that had kept her steady through 8 shots at 800M was draining away, replaced by the familiar cold weight of aftermath. She'd forgotten what this felt like. The way time seemed to catch up all at once. How every detail suddenly became too sharp, too real. The rifle across her back felt heavier with each step. NSH emerged from the tree and behind her property as the sun dipped toward the western peaks, painting the sky in shades of amber and rust. The wood pile she'd been working on that morning sat exactly where she'd left it, the axe still embedded in the chopping block. It felt like years had passed since she'd been splitting logs and pretending her biggest concern was winter fuel. Inside, she went through the mechanical process of cleaning and storing the rifle, her movements automatic. 40 rounds expended, brass collected and disposed of properly, weapon cleaned, oiled, wrapped, and returned to the duffel bag that would go back in the closet. Evidence erased. The ritual was comforting in its familiarity, even as her mind kept replaying each shot, each decision. The sight of Madison Harper's face through the scope, and Tyler's truck rumbled up the driveway before she'd finished. He let himself in without knocking, took one look at her, and headed straight for the kitchen. "In coffee or something stronger?" he asked. "In coffee? I need to stay sharp." Nay filled the pot with water, measured grounds with the precision of someone who'd done this in her kitchen many times before. They didn't speak while the machine gurgled and hissed. Tyler leaned against the counter, arms crossed, studying her with the same worried expression he'd worn at their mother's hospital bedside, at their father's funeral, at every crisis that had marked their lives. Deputy Cole was handling the scene. He finally said, "Captain Moore has his people securing the area and collecting evidence. They found blood trails, shell casings, signs of significant firefight. They're calling it a miracle no Marines were killed. What about the smugglers? Gone. Vehicles tore out of there fast enough to leave rubber on that old logging road. Cole found tire tracks, some abandoned equipment, but the people vanished." He poured 2 mugs, handed her one. "They're searching for the sniper position. Moore's convinced whoever helped those Marines was military trained. The shots were too precise, too professional." Laura wrapped both hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into her palms. "How long before they find Echo Point?" "Maybe tomorrow, if they're thorough. You clean up after yourself as much as possible. Then they'll find a position. Maybe some evidence someone was there, but nothing that directly points to you." He paused, took a long drink. "Unless someone saw you on the trail. Unless someone noticed your Jeep. Unless one of those smugglers had optics good enough to get a look at your position. I know the risks. Do you?" Tyler set his mug down with more force than necessary. "Because from where I'm standing, you just inserted yourself into something way bigger than a training accident. Those Marines stumbled onto an organized operation. Weapons, human trafficking, probably drugs. The kind of people who run operations like that don't forget when someone costs them a score. They'll be looking for whoever interfered." Laura met his eyes. "Would you rather I'd let them die?" "Of course not. He rubbed his face, suddenly looking older than 32. "I spent 3 years watching you put yourself back together. Watching you learn to sleep without nightmares, to go more than a day without jumping at loud noises. Today, you picked up that rifle like no time had passed at all. And I'm terrified that maybe you're not as okay as you've been pretending." "I'm not pretending anything." She moved to the window, staring out at the mountains that held so many secrets. "Now, I know exactly what I did today and what it might cost. But when I heard that radio call, when I realized they were trapped, I couldn't be the person who had the skills to help and chose to do nothing. Even though it means you might have to face questions you've been avoiding for 3 years." Even then, Tyler joined her at the window. "Captain Moore is good people. If this comes back to you, when it comes back to you, he'll listen. He'll understand. Will he? A civilian vigilante who opened fire on U.S. soil without authorization?" Laura shook her head. "Best case scenario, I'm looking at legal problems. Worst case, those smugglers figure out who I am before the authorities do." NH phone buzzed. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered, and Ms. Sheffield. The voice was male, professional, unfamiliar. "This is Captain Vincent Moore from Camp Redwood. I hope I'm not calling a bad time." Laura's pulse quickened. She met Tyler's eyes, saw her own concern mirrored there. "Captain, what can I do for you? I understand you're a wilderness guide, familiar with the Cascade Ridge area. I'm hoping you might be able to help with an incident that occurred this afternoon near Broken Ridge Canyon. Would you be available to come to the base tomorrow morning? We're interviewing anyone who might have knowledge of the terrain or unusual activity in that sector." "Of course. What time?" 0900. "If that works for you, ask for me at the main gate." He paused. "Miss Sheffield, this is important. Several lives were saved today by someone with exceptional skills and knowledge of these mountains. If you've seen anything unusual, heard anything, or have any information that might help us understand what happened, it could be crucial. I'll tell you everything I know," Laura said, and meant it, though what she knew and what she'd admit to knowing were 2 different things. "Thank you. I'll see you tomorrow." NTH's line went dead. Laura lowered the phone slowly. "Well, Tyler said that didn't take long. At Camp Redwood. Madison Harper sat on a cot in the medical bay while a corpse man checked her vitals for the third time. Around her, the rest of Bravo 2 received similar attention. Cameron Wells pacing despite the medics' protests. Devin Tucker with his ankle wrapped and elevated. Evan Mitchell quietly inventorying medical supplies with shaking hands that betrayed his calm exterior. Sergeant Monica Collins was in surgery down the hall, the bullet in her shoulder requiring more extensive work than field medicine could provide. Heart rate still elevated, the corpsman said, but that's expected. You've been through trauma. Try to get some rest tonight. Rest? Madison almost laughed. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw muzzle flashes and heard bullets cracking against stone. She joined Marines for a lot of reasons. Family legacy, desire to serve, need to prove herself capable of following in her brother's footsteps. But Danny's stories about deployment had been sanitized, she realized now. He'd never described a way time seemed to slow and accelerate simultaneously during contact. The way your mouth went dry and your hands moved on instinct. The terrible clarity of knowing you might die in the next 30 seconds. And Harper Cameron dropped onto the cot beside her, his swagger from this morning completely absent. You good? Define good. Alive, not shot. Able to walk out of here under your own power. He managed a weak smile, setting the bar pretty low today. Then I guess I'm good. She studied his face, seeing the same shock she felt reflected there. Who do you think was shooting for us? Moore is investigating. Current theory is someone with military training was in the area, heard our distress call, and decided to intervene. He lowered his voice. The analysts are saying 8 shots, 8 hits from somewhere around 800 M. That's not amateur hour. That's someone who knows exactly what they're doing. And special forces or former military with serious sniper training. Cameron's expression turned thoughtful. The angle of the shots came from Echo Point. According to the trajectory analysis, that's not easy terrain to reach quickly. Whoever helped us knew those mountains intimately and moved through them fast enough to set up position before we were overrun. Madison's mind turned over the possibilities. So, we're looking for someone who's military trained, knows the Cascade Ridge area, has access to a precision rifle, and happened to be monitoring military frequencies this afternoon. That's a pretty specific combination of factors, which means they can be found. Cameron studied her. You want to find them, don't you? Someone saved our lives today. The least we can do is say thank you. She didn't add the other reason, the one that made her throat tight. Her brother had died on a mission 3 years ago, partner to a Marine sniper who'd supposedly survived. The official report had been vague about details. Classified elements that her family security clearance didn't permit them to know. But Danny had mentioned his partner in letters home. Someone skilled, someone he trusted, someone whose name the military had redacted from every document Madison had managed to obtain. What if that someone was here in these mountains? What if the person who'd save her today was the same person who'd failed to save Danny? And Captain Moore entered the bay, his uniform still dusty from the field. Bravo 2, gather up. I need to debrief you while the details are fresh. They assembled around him. For Marines who'd left base that morning, expecting a routine navigation exercise, and returned with the kind of combat experience that would mark them forever. Moore's face was grave, but not unkind. First, I want you to know Sergeant Collins is out of surgery and stable. The doctors expect a full recovery, though she'll be on light duty for several weeks. Relief rippled through the group. Second, I want to acknowledge what you went through today. That was a combat situation, and you conducted yourselves with honor under extremely difficult circumstances. You should be proud, sir. Cameron said, What exactly did we stumble onto out there? That's classified at the moment, but I can tell you we're coordinating with federal authorities on a larger investigation. What happened to you today was connected to criminal activity we've been aware of, but unable to pin down. Your presence forced their hand, exposed their operation, and potentially saved lives beyond your own. Because of the shooter, Madison said Moore's eyes sharpened. Tell me about that. Private Harper, what did you observe? Only the effects, sir. We heard shots, saw hostiles dropping, but never saw the actual shooter. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, made it hard to determine exact origin. The rest of you? Nods around the group. Devin spoke up, his voice. It felt like guardian angel stuff, sir. Like someone was watching over us who we couldn't see. Interesting way to put it. Moore pulled out a tablet, brought up images. These are the hostile positions we found. We've identified blood at 9 separate locations, all consistent with long-range rifle shots. The accuracy is remarkable. Every hit was disabling, but not necessarily fatal. Whoever was shooting wasn't trying to rack up a body count. They were trying to protect you and disperse the threat. Someone with a conscience, Evans said quietly, or someone with experience who understands proportional response. More swipe through more images. We found the shooting position at Echo Point. It's been cleaned, but there's evidence of recent use. Bipod marks in the dirt, some disturbed vegetation. We're running analysis, but I'm not optimistic we'll get usable physical evidence. Madison leaned forward. Sir, permission to speak freely. Granted, whoever helped us today, are they in trouble? Because they saved 5 lives. If the military is planning to prosecute, that's above my pay grade, private. My job right now is to figure out what happened and who was involved. The legal questions come later. His expression softened slightly. But between us, I've been in this uniform long enough to know the difference between someone causing problems and someone solving them. Today, someone solved a problem. I'm not going to forget that. NH dismissed them with instructions to get food, rest, and counseling as needed. Madison found herself drifting toward the windows overlooking the base. Her mind churning. 800M, 8 shots. Military precision, knowledge of the area, monitoring military frequencies. NWH, are you? She wondered, staring out at the mountains where someone had saved her life. And why do I feel like I should know you? 40 miles away in a warehouse hidden in the forest beyond the old logging roads, Walter Freeman slammed his fist on a metal table hard enough to make it ring. The sound echoed through the cavernous space past crates of weapons and supplies that would need to be moved immediately through rooms where people he'd spent months trafficking sat in terrified silence. 8 men down, he said, voice tight with controlled fury. Our entire operation compromised. The Marines alive when they should be buried in that canyon. And you're telling me we don't know who interfered? Jeffrey Ross stood across the table. His second-in-command's face carefully neutral. We're working on it. The shooter was positioned somewhere high, probably Echo Point based on angles. They cleaned up after themselves professionally. Military training. Definitely. We got people checking local law enforcement contacts, looking for anyone matching that profile in the area. How many people in this region have that kind of training? More than you'd think. Former military settle in mountain towns all the time. Veterans looking for a quiet space. No questions. Ross pulled out his phone, brought up a map, but the combination of skills, access to equipment, and willingness to intervene, that narrows it down. We are focusing on former Rangers, Marine Scout snipers, Special Forces, someone who served, left, and stayed connected enough to monitor military frequencies. Freeman paced his mind working through implications and consequences. He'd spent 5 years building this operation. Weapons trafficking through remote mountain passes, using the vast wilderness as cover for moving product that couldn't risk highways or airports. The human trafficking had been Jeffrey's suggestion, a way to maximize profit from routes already established. It was ugly work, but Freeman had stopped caring about ugly years ago. NHI's conscience had died the same day his career had when Colonel Kenneth Drake and his superiors had needed a scapegoat for a contracting disaster, and Freeman's name had been convenient. 10 years of loyal service, of doing the dirty work the military couldn't do officially, and they'd thrown him away like trash. So he'd build his own operation, use his skills and contact for himself instead of ungrateful masters. And beauty, he'd been careful, always careful. The Marines stumbling onto site today had been bad luck. Acceptable risk from operating in military training areas, but manageable. He'd had overwhelming force and tactical advantage. The situation should have been resolved quickly, quietly, with bodies and evidence buried where they'd never be found. Instead, someone had interfered. Someone skilled enough to pick off his men from distance, trained enough to know exactly where to position themselves, connected enough to hear military distress calls. Heather, He called toward the back rooms. Get in here. Nth woman who emerged looked like she'd been crying, which she probably had been. Heather Dawson was weak. Useful, but weak. He brought her in from Eastern Europe 18 months ago under false promises. Kept her compliant through threats to family members back home. She handled logistics, paperwork, the boring details that kept operations running smoothly. She also knew too much to be released. You monitor law enforcement frequencies, Freeman said. What are they saying about today? Multiple agencies responding. Her voice wavered. Marines, local sheriff, federal investigators being called in. They're treating it as a major incident. Organized crime, weapons charges, attempted murder of military personnel. There's a lot of activity. Anyone mention the shooter? Only that they're looking. They found the position, but no identification yet. She hesitated. Walter, maybe this is a sign we should shut down for a while. If federal investigators we shut down, we lose millions in product and commitments. Clients don't accept excuses. He studied her, saw the fear in her eyes, and felt only contempt. He'd been afraid once when Drake had destroyed his career. He'd learned that fear was useless. Only action mattered. Jeffrey, start moving the product tonight. Use the northern routes. Avoid anything close to that canyon. Get our people clear of the region. Anyone who might be identified needs to disappear for a few weeks. He turned back to Heather. You're going to help us identify our shooter problem. I want a list of every former military person in a 100-mile radius with sniper training. Cross-reference with anyone living alone. Anyone who might have access to military communications. Anyone with a history of combat PTSD or disciplinary action. That's going to be a long list. Then you better start working. Ross cleared his throat. Boss, there's another angle we need to consider. Whoever shot at us today knows we're here, knows what we're doing. They're a witness. Even if they don't go to authorities now, they could later. We need to find them and neutralize the threat. Freeman nodded slowly. Agreed, but carefully. We can't afford more attention. Find out who they are, where they live, what vulnerabilities they have. Then we'll decide how to handle it. He smiled without warmth. Marines think someone saved them today. They don't realize that person just made themselves a target. Deputy Stephen Cole's office at the Cascade County Sheriff's Station smelled like coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long and paperwork that needed filing. He'd been on duty for 14 hours coordinating with federal agents, Marine investigators, and the state police who descended on his quiet jurisdiction like a small invasion force. His small-town cop career had prepared him for drunk tourists and lost hikers, not organized crime and military firefights. Run it by me again, he said to the federal agent sitting across from his desk. Special Agent Linda Morrison, FBI, sent from the Seattle field office with remarkable speed. You've been tracking this operation how long? 6 months officially, longer unofficially. We had intelligence about weapons moving to the Cascade Ridge region, but couldn't pin down the route or the people. Today's incident broke it open. She consulted her notes. The Marines forced the smuggler's hand, exposed their position. Thanks to whoever interfered, we now have physical evidence, witness testimony, and a starting point for a real investigation. Any idea who our mystery sniper is? Not yet. Forensics is processing the Echo Point site, but whoever was knew how to minimize evidence. We're working up a profile. Military background. Probably Marine given the weapon and tactics. Someone with deep knowledge of local terrain. She looked up. You've been in this area a long time, Deputy. Anyone stand out? Blue thought about Laura Sheffield, quiet and self-contained, living alone in the mountains for 3 years. He thought about Tyler Sheffield, who'd been unusually interested in the incident today, asking questions about response times and investigation scope. Brothers and sisters often shared traits. If Tyler had military knowledge, maybe Laura did, too. And Beauty Laura had never mentioned military service. She had arrived in Pinewood Valley 3 years ago, bought her cabin with cash, started a small wilderness guide business. She was polite, kept to herself, occasionally came to town for supplies. Nothing suspicious. Nothing that suggested combat experience or the kind of skills on display today. And I'll need to think about it. He finally said, make some discreet inquiries. This is a small community. People notice strangers, but they also protect their own. If our shooter is local, someone will know, but they might not volunteer information to federal agents. Fair enough. Captain Moore is interviewing local wilderness experts tomorrow. People who know the terrain. Maybe something will shake loose. Morrison stood. In the meantime, we're assuming the smuggling operation is still active, just displaced. They'll be moving assets, covering tracks, and they'll be looking for whoever cost them today's work. You think our shooter is in danger? I think anyone who interferes with organized crime should assume they're in danger until proven otherwise. She handed him a card. Call me if anything develops. And deputy, this is bigger than it looks. The weapons we found evidence of the human trafficking elements. This organization has resources and connections. Whoever took them on today either doesn't realize what they're dealing with, or they're very confident in their ability to handle it. After she left, Cole sat alone in his office, staring at the incident reports and photographs spread across his desk. 8 shots, 8 hits, 800M. Professional work, life-saving work. The kind of work that suggested someone with military training and a conscience. Nate picked up his phone, scrolled to Tyler Sheffield's contact, then set it down without calling. Tomorrow would be soon enough for questions. Tonight, he let whoever had saved those Marines have their peace. Laura's phone rang at 8 o'clock in the evening, just as she was trying to convince herself that food might be a good idea. The number was saved in her contacts, though she hadn't seen it appear on her screen in almost 2 years. Drive Graham, she answered. This is unexpected, Laura. I heard about the incident at Broken Ridge Canyon today. Dr. Phyllis Graham's voice carried the same calm professionalism Laura remembered from their therapy sessions, undercut now by concern. I'm calling off the record as someone who cares about your well-being rather than as your former therapist. How did you hear about it? I still consult with Camp Redwood on PTSD cases. Captain Moore contacted me this evening about counseling for the Marines involved. He mentioned they were saved by an unknown shooter with remarkable skills. A pause. Laura, please tell me you didn't. I heard a distress call. I responded a long sigh. Of course you did. Because walking away from people in danger has never been something you're capable of doing, even when it might be better for your own mental health. Laura found herself smiling despite the weight of the day. Are you calling to tell me I made a mistake? I'm calling to ask how you're handling it. Picking up a rifle again after 3 years, engaging in combat even at distance. Those are significant psychological events. Have you experienced flashbacks, dissociation, heightened anxiety? I'm fine, I mean it. I'm not saying it was easy, and I'm not saying I don't have concerns about consequences, but the actual shooting, I was in control the entire time. No panic, no flashbacks. It felt she struggled for words. It felt like the first time in 3 years that I was doing what I was trained to do. That's what worries me. Graham's voice softened. We spent a lot of sessions working on separating your identity from your role as a Marine, helping you understand that you're valuable as a person beyond your skills with a rifle. If reverting to that role feels good, feels right, it suggests maybe you haven't fully processed your transition to civilian life. Or maybe it suggests I can integrate both parts of myself, the person I was and the person I'm becoming. Perhaps the skepticism in Graham's tone was gentle but clear. I'm not going to lecture you. Laura, you're an adult who makes your own choices. But I want you to consider something. The situation today allowed you to use your skills in a clear-cut scenario. Bad people threatening good people. Intervention justified. Outcome successful. Real life is rarely that clean. What happens when the next situation is more ambiguous? When the choice isn't as clear? Laura thought about Freeman, seen through her scope, retreating with Heather Dawson, who'd looked terrified. She'd had a shot. She hadn't taken it. I think I can handle ambiguity. I hope so, because Captain Moore will likely identify you eventually. And when that happens, you'll face questions about authorization, legal justification, and your mental fitness to make the decisions you made. Your PTSD diagnosis will come up. People will question whether you should have been anywhere near a weapon. Let them question. I saved 5 lives today. You did. Graham agreed, and I'm proud of you for that. I just want to make sure it doesn't cost you the piece you've worked so hard to find. She paused. Call me if you need to talk. Laura, anytime. I mean that. Nth line went dead, leaving Laura alone with her thoughts and the growing realization that Dr. Graham was probably right. This wasn't over, and the consequences were just beginning to unfold. And outside, darkness had settled completely over the mountains. In that darkness, multiple people were searching for the same thing. The identity of the person who'd fired 8 perfect shots and changed everything. Laura stood at her window looking out at the night and wondered how long she had before someone found the answer. NNTH guard at Camp Redwood's main gate studied Laura's driver's license with the bored efficiency of someone who checked thousands of IDs. Behind him, the base sprawled across cleared land, utilitarian buildings, training facilities, and parking lots filled with military vehicles. Laura hadn't set foot on a Marine installation in 3 years. The sight of it made something tighten in her chest. Captain Moore's expecting you, the guard said, handing back her license along with a visitor badge. Building 7, second floor. Park in the visitor lot to your right. NSH drove through slowly, hyper-aware of how different it felt to be here as a civilian. No uniform, no rank, no automatic right to belong. Just Laura Sheffield, wilderness guide, here to answer questions about terrain and timing, and see how long she could maintain that fiction before someone saw through it. And Building 7's lobby smelled like floor polish and military bureaucracy. A receptionist directed her upstairs where Captain Moore waited outside a conference room. He was younger than she'd expected from his voice, maybe 50, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent significant time in the field rather than behind a desk. His handshake was firm, his eyes assessing her with intelligence that made Laura's guard go up immediately. M. Sheffield, thank you for coming in. I appreciate you making time on short notice. He gestured toward the conference room. Coffee, water? I'm fine, thank you. They settled on opposite sides of a table scattered with maps and photographs. Laura recognized Broken Ridge Canyon from multiple angles, saw Echo Point circled in red marker, her shooting position. They'd found it faster than she'd hoped. I'll be direct. Moore said yesterday's incident was unusual in several ways. 5 Marines on a training exercise encountered armed hostiles engaged in criminal activity before our QRF could respond. Someone intervened from long range. 8 shots fired from Echo Point. 8 hostiles hit. Perfect precision that gave our people time to survive until help arrived. He studied her face. You're familiar with that area? Very. I guide hiking groups through the Cascade Ridge region several times a month. Laura kept her voice steady. Professional. Echo Point is a popular destination for experienced climbers. The view is spectacular. How long would it take someone to reach Echo Point from, say, the Miller's Pass trailhead? 20 to 25 minutes if they're moving fast and know the route. Longer for inexperienced hikers. Moore nodded, making a note, and the shooting position itself. What kind of view does it provide of Broken Ridge Canyon? Clear line of sight across most of the canyon floor. It's why photographers love it. She met his eyes. Why are you asking me about terrain, Captain? Shouldn't you be asking about people? Whether I've seen anyone suspicious in the area. We're asking about both. He pulled out a photograph, slid across the table. This was taken at Echo Point yesterday, about an hour after the incident. Forensics found evidence of recent use. Disturbed ground consistent with a bipod. Some brass residue we're analyzing. Whoever was there knew what they were doing, knew how to minimize evidence. He paused. Ms. Sheffield, do you own any firearms? Laura's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. I have a hunting rifle living alone in the mountains. It's standard practice for dealing with wildlife and wet model and Remington 700. Common enough for civilian use. She didn't mention the M40A6 in her closet, which was built on the same action, but modified extensively for military precision. Close enough to the truth to pass casual scrutiny. Different enough to avoid immediate suspicion. Have you fired recently? Not in several weeks. Been too busy with clients. That was true. She hadn't fired the Remington since spring. The M4086 was another story, but he hadn't asked about that specifically. And Moore leaned back, his expression thoughtful. Here's my situation. Ms. Sheffield, someone with military training, saved 5 Marines yesterday. Someone who knows these mountains intimately, who had access to equipment and skills that aren't common in civilian populations. I'm grateful to that person. They prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss of life. But I also need to understand who they are and what their connection is to the situation. You think they might be involved with the smugglers? No. The shooting patterns make it clear they were protecting our people, not attacking them. But I do think there's someone with a complex relationship to the military. Someone who chose to intervene despite it potentially exposing them to legal consequences. He met her eyes directly. Someone who understands the weight of leaving people to die when you have the power to save them. Laura felt the weight of his words, the careful way he'd phrased them. He didn't know for certain, but he suspected. The question was, how much? I appreciate what you're trying to do, Captain, but I'm a civilian wilderness guide. If I'd seen anything unusual yesterday, I would have reported it. Would you? Because, in my experience, people with military backgrounds often have complicated feelings about authority. Sometimes they trust the system. Sometimes they work around it. He pulled out another photograph. This one of Laura in her Marine uniform, young and serious, standing in front of a base somewhere she barely remembered. Staff Sergeant Laura Sheffield, Marine Scout Sniper, honorably discharged 3 years ago with commendations for valor and marksmanship, multiple deployments, extensive combat experience, specialization in long-range precision fire. He set the photo down gently. Did you think we wouldn't find that? NTH's room felt suddenly smaller. Laura forced herself to breathe normally, to maintain composure. Even as her carefully constructed cover evaporated, my military service is a matter of public record. It doesn't prove I was at Echo Point yesterday. No, but it establishes capability and access to training, combined with your knowledge of the terrain, your proximity to the incident, and the fact that you live alone in these mountains with minimal social connections. It establishes reasonable suspicion. Moore's voice remained calm, almost gentle. I'm not trying to trap you, Miss Sheffield. I'm trying to understand what happened so I can protect both the Marines who were saved and the person who saved them. From what? From the smugglers who are almost certainly searching for whoever interfered with their operation. From legal complications that could arise if federal investigators decide someone acted as a vigilante from the weight of making life and death decisions alone. He leaned forward. If you were at Echo Point yesterday, if you made those shots, you need to understand the danger you're in. These aren't casual criminals. They're organized, well-ended, and they don't forgive threats to their business. Laura considered her options. Deny everything and maintain her cover. Increasingly flimsy, given what Moore had already discovered. Admit partial involvement and try to control the narrative or tell the truth and accept whatever consequences followed. Hypothetically, she said carefully, if someone with my background had heard that distress call and realized help wouldn't arrive in time, what would be the legal ramifications of their intervention? Hypothetically complex defense of others is a valid justification for use of force, but the specifics matter. Proportionality, reasonable belief of imminent danger, lack of safer alternatives. He smiled slightly. But between you and me, speaking as someone who spent 28 years in this uniform, I'd be more interested in thanking them than prosecuting them, even if they acted without authorization. Authorization is a bureaucratic concept. Lives are real. Yesterday, 5 real people went home alive because someone made a hard choice. He gathered the photographs, slid them back into a folder. Miss Sheffield, I'm not going to push you to confirm or deny anything right now, but I'm going to strongly suggest that you take precautions. If the smugglers identify you, they won't care about legal niceties. They'll see you as a threat to be eliminated. I can take care of myself. I'm sure you can. You're also one person against an organization with resources and no moral boundaries. He stood, extended his hand. My direct number is on that card. If you need anything, protection, legal advice, or just someone who understands what it's like to make impossible decisions, call me. Laura took the card, shook his hand. Thank you, Captain, for understanding, even hypothetically. Thank you, Miss Sheffield, for whatever you did or didn't do yesterday. NSH left the building feeling exposed in ways that had nothing to do with physical danger. Moore knew he couldn't prove it, might never be able to prove it, but he knew. And if he'd figure out with access to military records and investigative resources, how long before Freeman's people reached the same conclusion? And Madison Harper stood in the base library surrounded by 3 years of archived mission reports. She technically didn't have clearance to access, but Corporal Wells had learned during their brief time in Broken Ridge Canyon that Madison was very good with computers and very good at finding information people assumed was secure. She wasn't hacking exactly, just using credentials that belonged to people who'd been careless with passwords and exploiting search functions that weren't quite as restricted as they should be. NSHE was looking for a ghost, a Marine sniper who'd operated 3 years ago, who'd been partnered with her brother Danny, who'd survived when Danny hadn't. The official reports were redacted to hell, classified sections she couldn't access, even with borrowed credentials. But there were gaps in redactions, places where names had been removed, but context remained. Mission date, April 15th, 3 years ago. Location, redacted. Objective, redacted personnel. Staff Sergeant redacted and Sergeant Daniel Harper. She scrolled through page after page of blackened text, finding fragments. Intelligence indicated. Redacted at coordinates. Redacted. Team proceeded to position. Contact made at 0347 hours. Hostile forces exceeding intelligence estimates by redacted. Sergeant Harper, Kia, Staff Sergeant. Redacted. Extracted with injuries. It was like trying to reconstruct a picture from scattered pieces. But Madison had been doing this for 3 years, ever since the Marines had shown up at her parents' house with a folded flag and vague explanations about a mission gone wrong. Danny had written about his partner, not by name, but in the way he described their work together. My spotter's incredible. He'd written in one letter, best I've ever worked with. Makes me look good. Madison had assumed Dye's partner was male. Most snipers were, but assumptions could be wrong. NSHE pulled up the base personnel database. Search for Marines discharged around the time of Danny's death. The list was long. People left the service constantly for hundreds of reasons. She filtered by specialty, scout sniper. That narrowed it down. Then by date. Within 6 months of April 15th, narrower still, 3 names appeared. 2 were men who transferred to other units. The third was a woman, Staff Sergeant Laura Sheffield, discharged 3 months after Danny's death with a PTSD diagnosis and recommendation for civilian transition. Madison stared at the name, something clicking in her mind. Sheffield. Laura Sheffield. Why did that sound familiar? NSH opened a new search window. Typed Laura Sheffield Cascade Ridge. The results were sparse. A wilderness guiding business registered 3 years ago. A few local news mentions about trail maintenance. A brief profile in a regional outdoor magazine. The photograph accompanying the magazine article showed a woman in her mid-30s. Auburn hair. Serious expression. She was standing on a mountain overlook. The Cascade Ridge peaks behind her. Madison pulled up the map from yesterday's incident. Echo Point was marked. The shooting position circled. She cross-referenced with hiking trail information. Found the magazine article's photograph location. Nico Point and H hands were shaking now. She pulled up yesterday's incident report. Scanned through details. Unknown shooter. Military trained. Long-range precision. 8 shots from approximately 800 m. Extensive knowledge of terrain. Possibly monitoring military frequencies. Nah. Former Marine scout sniper living in the mountains where the incident occurred. Someone discharged with PTSD 3 months after Danny died. Someone whose name had been redacted from Danny's mission reports. And oh my God, Madison whispered. NTH's library door opened. Cameron walked in, saw her expression, immediately came over. Harper, you look like you've seen a ghost. What's wrong? I think I know who saved us yesterday. Yeah, Moore's investigating. No, listen. She turned the screen so he could see. Laura Sheffield, former Marine Scout sniper, discharged 3 years ago, lives in Pinewood Valley, knows the Cascade Ridge area intimately. Cameron, I think she was Dye's partner. I think she was there when he died. Cameron studied the information. his expression growing serious. That's a lot of assumptions based on circumstantial evidence. Is it former sniper? Right location, right skills, monitoring military frequencies? How many people fit that profile? Madison's voice rose. And if she was Danny's partner, if she survived when he didn't, then what? You think she's been living in these mountains feeling guilty? That she intervened yesterday because she's trying to make up for losing your brother? Cameron shook his head. Madison, even if you're right, what are you going to do? Confront her? Demand answers about classified operations? I deserve to know what happened to Danny. My parents deserve to know. We got vague explanations and redacted reports and flagged, but nobody would tell us the truth about how he died or why. Her hands clenched into fists. If Laura Sheffield knows, if she was there, I need to hear from her. And if hearing it makes things worse instead of better, Madison didn't have an answer for that. She only knew that for 3 years she'd lived with questions that ate at her, and now she might finally have a way to get answers, even if those answers hurt. I'm going to find her, she said. I'm going to talk to her. You can come with me or not. Cameron sighed. Of course, I'm coming with you. Someone needs to stop you from doing something stupid. He paused. But we do this smart. Okay. We approach her respectfully. We ask questions politely. And if she tells us to leave, we leave. Agreed. Agreed. They were halfway to the parking lot when Madison's phone rang. Private Devin Tucker, still recovering from his ankle injury, and Harper. Thank God. Have you seen the news? And what news? Federal authorities just announced they arrested 3 people connected to the smuggling operation. Low-level guys who got caught moving product out of the area. They're saying it's connected to a larger organization running weapons and trafficking people through the Cascade Ridge area. Tucker's voice dropped. Madison. These are seriously bad people, and they're still out there looking for whoever interfered with their operation yesterday. Madison felt cold spread through her chest. If Laura Sheffield had saved them, if she'd fired those shots, then she'd made herself a target. An organization that trafficked weapons, and people wouldn't hesitate to eliminate a witness. We need to warn her, she told Cameron, and warn her. We don't even know for sure it's her. Then we find out, and if it is her, we make sure she knows what she's dealing with. They drove toward Pinewood Valley, neither of them quite acknowledging that they might be rushing toward danger themselves. Freeman received the information at 11 in the morning, delivered by Jeffrey Ross with the grim satisfaction of someone who'd worked hard for results. Laura Sheffield, Ross said, laying out printed documents on the warehouse table. 35. Former Marine Scout sniper, discharged 3 years ago and relocated to Pinewood Valley, lives alone in a cabin 3 miles from town, runs a small wilderness guide business. Prior military record is mostly classified, but we got sources who confirm extensive combat experience and a reputation for exceptional marksmanship. Freeman studied the photograph. A woman with auburn hair and hard eyes standing on a mountain trail. She looked capable, dangerous, exactly the kind of person who could have made those shots yesterday. How certain are we? 90%. Location matches. Skills match. Timeline matches. She has motive. Military background means she'd respond to distress calls. And get this, she was discharged with PTSD after mission went bad. Lost her spotter in combat. Blamed herself. Couldn't handle the guilt. Classic hero complex. Looking for redemption. So, she's unstable or highly motivated. Depends on your perspective. Ross leaned forward. The question is what we do about it. She's a witness who can identify our operation area, our tactics. Probably got a good look at some of our people through her scope. Even if she hasn't gone to authorities yet, she's a liability. And Freeman considered options. Elimination was simple but risky. Killing a former Marine would bring scrutiny they couldn't afford with federal investigators already sniffing around. But leaving her alive meant accepting a permanent threat. What about leverage? He asked. Does she have family connections? Vulnerabilities. Younger brother Tyler Sheffield. Park ranger lives in town. They're close. Ross pulled up more information. No romantic relationships we can find. Few friends. Pretty isolated lifestyle, which works in our favor. If something happens to her, There aren't many people who will notice immediately. I'm not interested in making her disappear unless absolutely necessary. That brings its own complications. Freeman stood paced. What I want is insurance. Find a way to ensure her silence that doesn't require violence, leverage, intimidation, whatever works. Make her understand that interfering again would have consequences for people she cares about. And if that doesn't work, then we eliminate the problem. But I want to try the civilized approach first. He smiled without warmth. After all, we're not monsters. We're businessmen protecting our interests. Ross nodded and left to make arrangements. Freeman remained at the table studying Laura Sheffield's photograph. She had the look of someone who'd seen violence and learned to live with it. That made her dangerous, but also meant she might understand the logic of self-preservation. And H hoped she was smart enough to walk away. For both their sakes. Heather Dawson had been listening to the conversation from the back room where she'd been sorting paperwork, and every word made her feel sicker. She'd known Freeman's organization was dangerous. You didn't traffic weapons and people without being. People suffering. And SH typed quickly. Laura Sheffield in danger. Freeman knows who she is. They're planning something. Please help her. Please help me. She included Freeman's warehouse address, then hesitated before adding, I'm being held against my will. I want to testify. And her finger hovered over the send button. Once she did this, there was no going back. Freeman would know she betrayed him. He'd probably kill her if he got the chance. And beauty, maybe, just maybe, she could save someone else's life. And maybe that was worth dying for. And SH pressed send. Laura was halfway through preparing dinner when headlights swept across her windows. An unfamiliar vehicle coming up her isolated driveway. She moved to the closet automatically, hand reaching for the rifle before she stopped herself. Not every visitor was a threat. Probably nth knock on her door was hesitant, almost apologetic. Through the window, she saw two people in Marine uniforms. Young, clearly uncertain about what they were doing here. NSH opened the door wearily. Can I help you? Nth male Marine spoke first. Miss Sheffield, I'm Corporal Cameron Wells. This is Private Madison Harper. We were hoping to talk to you about yesterday. Anna Laura's stomach dropped. Madison Harper, Danny's sister, standing on her doorstep, looking at her with questions and need, and something that might become anger once she knew the truth. I'm not sure what you mean, Laura said, buying time she didn't have. Please, Madison said. We just want to talk. I think you knew my brother, Daniel Harper. He died 3 years ago on a mission, and I believe you were his partner. There it was. The truth laid bare by someone who connected dots Laura had hoped would stay scattered. She could deny it, close the door, maintain the fiction. But looking at Madison's face, so much like Danny's, the same stubborn determination, she found she couldn't. And come in, Laura said quietly. This conversation is going to take a while. They settled in her small living room. The tension so thick it was almost visible. Laura didn't offer refreshments, didn't make small talk. She just looked at Madison and saw Danny's eyes staring back at her. Yes, she said, I was your brother's spotter. We worked together for 8 months. He was her voice caught. He was one of the best partners I ever had, and I failed to bring him home. Madison's face crumpled briefly before she regained control. Tell me what happened, please. Nobody would give us details. Just said the mission was classified and Danny died honorably. But I need to know how. I need to know why. Laura took a breath. Forced herself to speak words she'd never said out loud to anyone except Dr. Graham. We were tracking a high V-value target in Afghanistan. Intelligence said he'd be at a compound with minimal security. We set a position on a rooftop 800M out. Waited for confirmation. Danny was my spotter. He had eyes on the compound. Fed me information about movement patterns, guard rotations. Everything looked clean. NSH paused, remembering too clearly. At 0347, our target appeared. I had the shot lined up. Perfect conditions. Danny gave me final clearance. I was about to fire when he said, Wait! Something's wrong. He'd noticed movement the intelligence hadn't mentioned. Additional hostiles in positions they weren't supposed to be. We aborted, started pull back, and Cameron and Madison listened with absolute attention, not interrupting. And they'd known we were coming, Laura continued. The intelligence was compromised deliberately or through incompetence. I never found out which. There were 3 times as many hostiles as reported, and they'd set up an ambush specifically for snipers. We were pinned down on that rooftop, taking fire from multiple directions. Danny kept calling in our position requesting extraction, but response time was 45 minutes. How long did you have? Cameron asked quietly. Maybe 15 minutes before they breached the roof access. I told Danny to run to get to the extraction point on his own. He refused. Laura's voice hardened. He said he had my 6. Always had my 6, so we fought. We held them off as long as we could, but there were too many. A grenade came over the wall. Danny saw it first, yelled for me to move. I rolled one way. He rolled the other. The blast. She couldn't continue for a moment. Madison's hand was pressed to her mouth, tears streaming silently. He died protecting me, Laura finally said. Died buying me time to survive. The QRF arrived 8 minutes later and extracted me, but Danny was already gone, and I had to go home and face the fact that I'd survived because someone better than me had sacrificed himself. Empty silence stretched out heavy with grief and understanding. Finally, Madison spoke, her voice thick. And you were there yesterday at Echo Point. You saved us. Yes, because you couldn't save Danny, and you weren't going to let his sister die. 2. Laura met her eyes. Because I heard Marines in danger, and I had the skills to help. It could have been anyone in that canyon. It happened to be you, and yes, that mattered, but I would have done the same regardless. Thank you, Madison whispered, for yesterday, for telling me the truth about Danny. For she broke down completely, shoulders shaking with sobs she'd probably been holding back for 3 years. Cameron put his arm around her, looked at Laura with something like respect. We came here to warn you, the smugglers from yesterday. They're part of a major organization. Federal authorities arrested some low-level people, but the leadership is still out there. They'll be looking for whoever interfered. I know. Then you know you're in danger. I can handle. Laura's phone rang, cutting her off. Deputy Cole's number. She answered. Laura, listen carefully. Cole said, his voice urgent. I just received information from someone inside the smuggling organization. They've identified you. They know where you live. I'm heading to your location now with backup, but you need to get somewhere safe immediately. Do not stay at your cabin. Laura's blood ran cold. How long do I have? Unknown. Could be hours. Could be minutes. Just move now. NSH terminated the call. Looked at Cameron and Madison. You need to leave. It's not safe here. Then it's not safe for you either. Cameron said standing. Come with us back to base. Captain Moore will provide protection. I'm not running to end and window exploded inward. Glass sprang across the room as something metallic clattered on the floor. Laura's training kicked in instantly. Flashbang. Close your eyes. Nth blast was deafening, disorienting. Through the ringing in her ears, Laura heard boots on her porch, voices shouting commands. Freeman's people had found her, and they weren't planning to talk. Laura's ears rang from the flashbang, but her body moved on. Instinct honed by years of training. She grabbed Madison and Cameron, pulled them both down behind the heavy oak table she positioned near the fireplace, specifically because it could serve as cover. The first burst of automatic fire came through the shattered window, tearing chunks from the walls where they'd been standing seconds before. And stay low, Laura hissed. Cameron, you arm sidearm only. We weren't expecting combat, Madison. Same. 3 pistols against what sounded like at least 4 rifles. Laura's mind calculated odds and options with clinical speed. The rifle was in the bedroom closet, too far to reach without exposing herself to the shooters outside. But she had other resources. Living alone in isolated territory had taught her to prepare for various threats, even if she hadn't expected them to arrive quite like this. When I move, you both go out the back door, Laura said. There's a trail that leads down to the main road. Deputy Cole is on his way. Get to him. Tell him what's happening. We're not leaving you, Madison said, her voice shaking but determined. You are because I need you alive to testify about yesterday. You're witnesses to the smuggling operation. That makes you valuable. Laura didn't mention the other reason that Danny's sister dying in her cabin would be a failure. She couldn't survive. On 3. 1. Surrender the building. A voice shouted from outside. Male confident, with military precision in the cadence. You have 30 seconds to come out with hands visible. Laura recognized a voice from her scope yesterday. Jeffrey Ross, Freeman's second in command, which meant this wasn't a kill squad. They wanted something more complicated than simple elimination. 2. She continued, then grabbed a heavy iron poker from the fireplace. 3. She hurled the poker through a window on the opposite side of the cabin, creating noise and movement. Gunfire immediately tracked that direction, giving her the split second she needed. Laura lunged to the bedroom, rolled through the door as bullets chewed into the door frame behind her. Her hands found the closet, pulled out the duffel bag, extracted the M40A6 with movements so practiced they bypassed conscious thought. Empty rifle settled into her hands like an old friend. She'd sworn 3 years ago she'd never hold it again in combat. That oath had lasted exactly 24 hours past the first time people needed her. Through the bedroom window, she counted 4 tangos. No, 5. 2 at the front. 3 spreading to flank positions. Professional formation. They expected resistance, but probably not from someone with her specific skill set. That gave her an edge. Cameron and Madison were at the back door, ready to bolt. Laura made eye contact with them. Not at once. They disappeared into the forest as she sighted on the nearest hostile. A man moving toward the bedroom window with his rifle up. She led him by a fraction compensated for the short range and fired. Empty was clean. The hostile dropped and chaos erupted outside as the remaining 4 scrambled for better cover. Laura worked the bolt, acquired a second target. The shooter near her would pile, thinking the logs would protect him. She put a round to the narrow gap between stacked pines, saw him go down, and 3 left, and they were learning, keeping hard cover between themselves and her position. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Ross called out. We just want to talk, Sheffield. We know who you are, what you did yesterday. Let's discuss this like professionals. Laura didn't waste breath responding. She was calculating distances and angles, trying to determine if the 3 remaining hostiles would press the attack or withdraw. They'd lost 2 men in under 30 seconds that tended to dampen aggressive tendencies. NH phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. Cole is 5 minutes out. Federal agents 10 minutes. Can you hold? NSH typed one-handed while keeping the rifle trained on the doorway, working on it. NA canister bounced through the window, not a flashbang this time. Smoke grenade. They were adapting, using obscuration to close distance. Laura fell back in the bedroom, moved to the kitchen where she had multiple sight lines. The smoke began filling the cabin's interior, thick and accurate. Through the haze, she saw movement at the front door. Someone kicked it open, came through fast and low. Laura fired at center mass, heard a grunt of pain, but not the sound of a body hitting the floor. Body armor. They'd equipped for serious resistance. In shifted position again, knowing staying static was death. The cabin had become a killing box. Too much smoke, too many entry points, enemies with body armor and numbers on their side. She needed to get outside, find defensible terrain. Laura grabbed her go bag from the hall closet, always packed, always ready. Because paranoia was just preparedness by another name, and moved toward the back door that Cameron and Madison had used. She dropped low, pushed through, and emerged into the forest as bullets chewed bark on the trees around her. Nth trail down toward the road was steep and narrow, lined with thick pine and granite outcroppings. Laura knew every meter of it, had hiked it hundreds of times. That familiarity let her move fast despite the darkness, despite the weight of the rifle and pack, despite the shouts behind her. As Freeman's people gave chase, NSH reached an outcropping 50m down, dropped into position. Through the scope, she saw 3 figures emerging for her cabin. Wait, no, 4. One was pulling another who seemed injured from her earlier shots. They were retreating. Falling back to vehicles she could hear starting up on the access road. Laura could have taken another shot, maybe 2, but she lowered the rifle instead, They were breaking contact, withdrawing. Shooting them in the back as they retreated felt less like combat and more like murder, and she spent 3 years trying to maintain the distinction. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Deputy Cole's backup arriving, probably with Captain Moore's people right behind them. Laura stayed in her position, controlling her breathing, letting the adrenaline bleed away slowly. Her cabin was compromised, possibly destroyed. Her cover was blown, and Freeman now knew exactly how dangerous she was. And beauty, she was alive. Cameron and Madison were alive. Sometimes that was the only victory that mattered. Deputy Cole's cruiser slid to a stop on the main road where Cameron and Madison had emerged from the trail, both breathless and wildeed. Right behind him came 2 more sheriff vehicles and a black SUV that could only be federal agents. Cole jumped out, weapon drawn. "Where's Laura?" he demanded. "Still up there," Cameron gasped. "She covered our escape." There were shooters. "At least 4. He 5. Madison corrected. "I counted 5 before the flashbang." Cole spoke rapidly into his radio, coordinating response. More vehicles arrived. Captain Moore in a base vehicle. Heather Dawson herself were all still on site. Freeman had minutes to decide. Run and abandon everything or fight and try to preserve his operation. NH chose fight. It was a mistake. Laura watched from a vantage point 300 from the warehouse, positioned with a federal sniper team that had grudgingly accepted her presence after Captain Moore vouched for her skills. Through binoculars, she observed the organized chaos as tactical teams moved into position, establishing perimeter and cutting off escape routes, and all teams in position. Moore's voice came through the radio. "Negotiator, you're up." NA loudspeaker crackled to life. "Walter Freeman. This is Special Agent Linda Morrison, FBI. You're surrounded by federal and local law enforcement. We have warrants for your arrest on multiple charges, including weapons trafficking, human trafficking, and attempted murder. Surrender peacefully, and no one needs to get hurt." Silence from the warehouse. Then, gunfire erupted from multiple windows. Automatic weapons raking the tree where tactical teams had taken cover. Freeman had made his decision, and return fire authorized, more commanded. Neutralize hostile shooters. Priority is securing the witness inside. Heather Dawson is considered a victim, not a combatant. Anti-firefight was brief but intense. Freeman's people were experienced, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Within 10 minutes, 3 hostiles were down, 2 surrendered, and the rest fled into the forest where pursuit teams were waiting. Laura tracked Freeman himself through her scope as he emerged from a side entrance, pulling Heather with him. She had a clear shot, could have ended him right there. But Moore's words echoed in her mind. Observer only. She maintained her position, watched as tactical teams closed in. Freeman saw them coming, saw his situation was hopeless, and did something Laura hadn't expected. He released Heather, pushing her toward the tactical teams, and raised his hands in surrender. "And don't shoot," he called out. "I'm unarmed. I surrender." Teams swarmed him, zip-tied his hands, searching for weapons. Heather collapsed to her knees, sobbing with relief as agents surrounded her protectively. Laura watched it all through her scope, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and emptiness. It was over. The immediate threat was neutralized. And beauty, somehow, it didn't feel like enough. 3 hours later, Laura sat in an interrogation room at the federal building in the nearest city, giving her statement for what felt like the 100th time. Special Agent Morrison was thorough, professional, and increasingly frustrated with the legal complexities Laura's involvement created. "So, you heard a military distress call on a frequency you weren't authorized to monitor, traveled to a remote location with military-grade weapon you're not licensed to carry in that capacity, and engaged multiple targets without authorization from any law enforcement or military authority." Morrison rubbed her temples. "Ms. Sheffield, do you understand how many laws that potentially violates? I understand I saved 5 lives and helped expose a major criminal organization. If that means I face legal consequences, I'll accept them." Laura met her eyes steadily. "But I won't apologize for making the choice to help when help was needed. That's very noble. It's also going to be a nightmare for prosecutors trying to figure out what to charge you with, if anything. Morrison leaned back. The good news is that Captain Moore, Deputy Cole, and both Marines you protected are all prepared to testify on your behalf. Freeman's people attacked you in your home, which establishes self-defense, and your actions yesterday, while irregular, resulted in the preservation of military personnel, an exposure of criminal activity. A decent defense attorney would have a field day with that. So I'm not being arrested. Not today. But you'll need to remain available for further questioning, and there will be a review board. The military will want to examine your actions. The FBI will want details on everything you observed, and there may be civil liability issues. She softened slightly. Unofficially, I think you did the right thing. But officially, I can't condone vigilante actions, no matter how well-intentioned. I understand. Morrison stood, extended her hand. Heather Dawson is asking to meet you. She says you spared her life yesterday when you had a shot on Freeman. She wants to thank you. Laura followed her down a corridor to another room where Heather waited under protective custody. The young woman looked exhausted, traumatized, but also determined. When she saw Laura, she stood immediately. You could have killed me yesterday, Heather said without preamble. I was with Freeman in your scope. But you didn't shoot. You looked like a victim, not a willing participant. I am. Heather twisted her hands together. I want to testify against Freeman and everyone in his organization. I want to help put them away so they can't hurt anyone else. But I also want you to know the information I sent to Deputy Cole. The warning that got you out before Freeman could. It was because you showed mercy yesterday. You saw me as a person, not just a target. That meant something. Laura didn't know what to say. She'd made the decision not to shoot Heather in a split second, based on instinct and training that said, identify your target. Confirm hostile intent before engaging. She hadn't realized it would matter this much. Thank you for the warning. She finally managed. You probably saved lives today. We both did. Heather smiled tremulously. Maybe that means something good can come from all this horror. Laura was released late that evening with instructions to remain in the area and make herself available for further interviews. Tyler picked her up from the federal building, took one look at her exhausted face, and drove her straight to his apartment in town rather than back to her compromised cabin. You're staying here until we figure out what happens next, he said firmly. No arguments. I wasn't going to argue. Laura collapsed on his couch, suddenly feeling every hour of the past 2 days. My cabin's probably destroyed anyway. I saw bullet holes in every wall. Insurance will cover it. And if it doesn't, we'll figure out. Tyler sat beside her, wrapped an arm around her shoulders. I'm proud of you, you know. Terrified for you. Furious at the danger you put yourself in, but proud. You saved people. That's who you've always been. Danny used to say the same thing. Laura closed her eyes. He'd tell me I had a hero complex, that I couldn't walk away from someone in trouble. I always thought he was teasing, but maybe he was warning me. Or maybe he knew that quality was exactly why he trusted you as his partner. They sat in silence for a while, processing everything that had happened. Finally, Tyler spoke again. Madison Harper called me, asked if you'd be willing to meet with her tomorrow. Officially this time, not in the middle of a firefight. She has questions about Danny, about what happened, but she also said she understands now why you left the Marines, and she doesn't blame you for surviving when he didn't. Laura felt tears sting her eyes. I don't know if I can face her again. Telling her once was hard enough. She's not asking you to tell her again. She's asking for a chance to say thank you and maybe find some closure you both need. Tyler squeezed her shoulder. Think about it. No pressure. Nth. Next morning, Laura met Madison at Maria's Mountain Diner, a neutral location that felt safer than anywhere connected to military or law enforcement. The diner was quiet, early enough that the breakfast rush hadn't started, giving them privacy. Madison looked better than yesterday, the cuts on her face cleaned and bandaged, the wild fear replaced by something more contemplative. She stood when Laura entered, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. Two women connected by grief and survival. Thank you for coming, Madison said as they sat. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure either, but Tyler convinced me you deserved the chance to talk. They ordered coffee from Martha Hudson, who knew better than to interrupt with small talk. When they were alone again, Madison spoke carefully, as if she'd rehearsed this. I spent 3 years angry at the Marine, who survived when Danny didn't. I didn't know your name, didn't know your face, but I knew someone had made out alive, and my brother hadn't. It felt unfair. It felt wrong. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. But after yesterday, after seeing how you fought to protect Cameron and me, after understanding what you've carried all this time, I realized Danny didn't die because you failed. He died because he made a choice to protect his partner. That's who he was. That's the legacy he left. Laura felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. He was the best of us. And I've spent 3 years trying to honor that by walking away from everything we did together. I thought distance would help me heal. But maybe what I needed was to accept that his sacrifice wasn't wasted on someone who wasn't worth saving. You saved 5 people yesterday, Laura. You saved me again in that cabin. Danny's choice to protect you meant that years later, you could protect others. That's not a waste. That's exactly what he would have wanted. They talked for 2 hours, sharing stories about Danny that made them both laugh and cry. Madison told her about their childhood, about how Danny had always wanted to be a Marine like their grandfather, about the letters he'd sent home that mentioned his incredible partner who made him better at his job. Laura shared memories of their work together, the quiet moments between missions, the way Danny could always make her laugh, even in the worst situations. And by the end, something had shifted between them. Not quite friendship. The connection was too complicated, too tied to trauma, but understanding, mutual respect, and perhaps the beginning of peace. I need to ask you something, Madison said as they prepared to leave. When you look at me, do you just see Danny? Does it hurt to be around me because I remind you of what you lost? Laura considered the question honestly. At first, yes, but now I see someone brave enough to join the Marines, knowing the risks, strong enough to survive combat and keep moving forward. I see Danny's sister, but I also see Madison Harper, and I'm grateful I got to meet you even under these circumstances. Madison smiled, genuine and warm. I'm grateful, too. And Laura, if you ever need someone to talk to who understands what it's like to lose someone in combat, I'm here. 1 week later, Laura stood outside Colonel Kenneth Drake's office at a Marine base 3 hours from Pinewood Valley. She'd requested this meeting, used every connection she had to make it happen. Captain Moore had made calls on her behalf, and eventually the bureaucracy had relented. Drake's assistant showed her in. The office was exactly what she'd expected. Walls covered with commendations and photographs. A desk organized with military precision. And behind it, the man who destroyed her career through incompetence or corruption or some combination of both. Colonel Kenneth Drake was 58, gay-haired with the bearing of someone who'd spent his life in uniform. He looked older than Laura remembered, tired in ways that had nothing to do with physical exertion. Staff Sergeant Sheffield, he said, then corrected himself. Ms. Sheffield, I wasn't expecting to see you again. I'm sure you weren't. Laura remained standing, refused the offered seat. I'm here because 3 years ago, you sent Danny Harper and me into Afghanistan with intelligence you knew or should have known was compromised. We walked into an ambush. Danny died. I survived. And you covered it up to protect your career. Drake's face palled. That's a serious accusation. The investigation cleared me of any wrongdoing. The investigation was a whitewash. We both know it. Laura stepped closer to his desk. But I'm not here to relitigate the past or demand justice I'll never get. I'm here to tell you something. Despite what happened, despite the guilt and the PTSD and the 3 years I spent trying to forget I was ever a Marine when people needed help last week, I used the skills you trained me to have. I saved lives, and I realized that my service, my training, everything I learned in this uniform, it wasn't invalidated by one mission gone wrong or one commanding officer who failed us. Sheffield, I'm not finished. Her voice was hard. You took the easy path 3 years ago. You protected yourself instead of taking responsibility. And I let you because I was too broken to fight back. But I want you to know that I'm not broken anymore. I'm better than I was. And if there Are other Marines under your command facing impossible situations because of compromised intelligence or bureaucratic cowardice? I pray they survive to hold you accountable in ways I couldn't. NSH turned to leave, then paused at the door. Danny Harper died because he believed in something bigger than himself. He believed the Marines stood for honor and integrity. I've spent 3 years wondering if that belief was naive. But after this week, I think I understand. The institution is only as good as the people who comprise it. You failed us. But there are others like Captain Moore, like the Marines who fought beside me, who still represent what the Corps is supposed to be. That's what I'm choosing to remember. NSH walked out without waiting for a response. Whatever Drake might say, whatever justifications or excuses he might offer, didn't matter. Laura had said what she needed to say, had faced a man who represented her worst memories, and found she could walk away from him without the weight dragging her down. It wasn't complete healing. Trauma didn't work that way, but it was progress. NTWO. Weeks after the incident, Laura stood in the remains of her cabin surveying the damage. The structure was salvageable. The logs were solid, the foundation intact, but the interior would need complete renovation. Windows replaced, walls repaired, furniture discarded or restored. It would take months and significant money. Captain Moore had pulled strings to get her insurance claim expedited. The Marines were also quietly offering compensation for the use of her cabin in what they were officially calling an ongoing investigation into criminal activity in training areas. It was bureaucracy's way of acknowledging what she'd done without formally admitting anything. And Tyler was helping her sort through what could be saved when a truck pulled up. Cameron Wells and Madison Harper, both in civilian clothes, both carrying tool belts. We heard you might need help with repairs. Cameron called out. Figure we owe you at least some carpentry work. You don't owe me anything, Laura said. Actually, we owe you everything, Madison replied, walking over. But we'll settle for helping rebuild. Besides, I've been looking for a way to learn more about wilderness survival, and Tyler mentioned you might be willing to teach once the cabin's fixed. Laura looked at her, Danny's sister, who'd somehow transformed from a reminder of grief into a connection to something hopeful, and felt herself smile. I think that could be arranged. They worked through the afternoon, pulling out damaged drywall, cataloging what needed replacing. It was manual labor, simple and mindless, but it felt good. Felt like building something instead of just surviving. Deputy Cole stopped by in the evening, bringing pizza and news. Freeman's been arraigned on about 40 different charges. His attorneys are already trying to negotiate a plea, but the prosecutors aren't interested. With Heather Dawson's testimony, they've got evidence connecting him to trafficking operations across 3 states. He's looking at life without parole. Good, Laura said simply. The other news is that the review board finished evaluating your actions from last week. They've decided not to pursue any charges. Captain Moore testified that you acted in defense of military personnel under imminent threat, and that your intervention was proportional and appropriate given the circumstances. Cole grinned. They also noted that your marksmanship was exemplary and demonstrated exceptional fire discipline. I think that's military speak for. We're glad she was on our side. Laura felt relief wash through her. She hadn't been certain how the legal questions would resolve. Hadn't known if her choice to intervene would cost her freedom or just peace of mind. Knowing she was clear that officially her actions were viewed as justified lifted a weight she hadn't realized she was still carrying. There's one more thing Cole added. The FBI want to hire you as a consultant. They're dealing with several cases in remote wilderness areas where they need someone with your specific combination of skills, tactical knowledge, terrain familiarity, long-range capabilities. It would be contract work, part-time, but well paid. Interested? Nah. Laura paused. Considering a month ago, she would have refused immediately, would have insisted she was done with that life, that she'd chosen a different path. But after the events of the past 2 weeks, she'd realized something crucial. She didn't have to choose between who she was and who she'd been. She could be both. I might be. Let me think about it. 1 month later, Laura's cabin was habitable again. Not finished. The renovation would take more time, but functional enough that she could move back in. She stood on her porch at dawn, coffee in hand, watching the sun rise over the Cascade Ridge Mountains. NHCR phone buzzed. A text from Madison. Training exercise today. Wish me luck and thank you for everything. Another from Captain Moore. FBI consultant position still open if you're interested. No pressure, but we could use someone like you. And one from Dr. Graham. How are you doing, Laura? Been thinking about you. Coffee next week. NSH smiled, responded to each message, and settled into her chair. The mountain stretched out before her, familiar and vast. She'd come here 3 years ago to hide from who she'd been, to escape the memories and the guilt and the weight of decisions made under fire. She'd thought isolation would heal her. And beauty healing, she'd learned, didn't come from running away. It came from facing what hurt, from accepting that the past couldn't be changed, but its meaning could evolve, from understanding that surviving when others didn't wasn't a burden. It was a responsibility to live fully enough for both. Danny Harper had died protecting her because he believed she was worth saving. For 3 years, she'd struggled to accept that belief. Now, finally, she thought she understood what he'd seen. Not someone perfect or without flaws, but someone who would use her second chance to help others, to make hard choices when necessary, to stand between danger and those who needed protection. NSH would always carry Danny's death with her. The grief and the guilt wouldn't simply disappear. But alongside those feelings, she now carried something else. The memory of Madison's forgiveness, the knowledge of lives saved, the understanding that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, but about building a future that honored it. Laura finished her coffee, went inside, and pulled out the duffel bag containing her rifle. She cleaned and checked it methodically, the ritual, comfortable now instead of painful. Then she wrapped it carefully and stored in the closet, not buried and forgotten, but accessible, ready for if and when she might need it again. Because she'd learned something important. Being a warrior and being at peace weren't mutually exclusive. She could be someone who guided tourists through beautiful mountains, and someone who could make 800-meter shots when Marines were in danger. She could be Laura Sheffield, civilian, and Staff Sergeant Sheffield, Marine sniper. She could be both. And maybe finally that was enough. 3 miles away in Pinewood Valley, Martha Hudson opened her diner and saw a familiar face at the counter. Laura Sheffield, no longer the isolated stranger who kept to herself, but a regular customer who'd slowly become part of the community's fabric. The usual, Martha asked. Please. And could you add 2 more to-go orders? I'm meeting some friends for a hike. Martha smiled, recognizing the change in Laura's voice. Less guarded, more open. Over the past month, the quiet woman from the mountains had transformed from mystery to local hero. Though Laura hated the term, the news had spread about what happened, filtered through small-town gossip and official reports until everyone knew some version of the story. Laura Sheffield, former Marine, who'd saved lives and faced down criminals in the mountains they all called home. MBUT, more than the heroics. People noticed the subtle changes. Laura smiled more. She engaged in conversation instead of just answering questions. She'd started mentoring young adults interested in wilderness skills and military careers, passing on knowledge she'd once wanted to bury. And Cameron and Madison arrived at the diner, both wearing hiking gear. They'd requested leave to spend time in the area before their next assignments and had spent much of it hiking with Laura, learning from her expertise while offering their own experiences from recent training. You ready for Echo Point? Cameron asked. I've been wanting to see the view from up there since we learned what happened there. It's a challenging climb, but worth it, Laura said. And I think it's time I stopped avoiding the place because of one difficult memory. Time to make new ones there. They drove to the trailhead together, began the ascent Laura had made under such different circumstances a month ago. This time there was no urgency, no adrenaline, no desperate race to save lives. Just 3 people hiking together, sharing stories in companionable silence, enjoying the mountains under clear skies. When they reached Echo Point, Laura stood where she'd taken those 8 shots, where she'd made the decision to intervene despite 3 years of telling herself she was done with that life. The view was exactly as spectacular as she'd told Captain Moore. Canyon spreading out below, Mountain peaks in every direction. Endless forests and sky. Madison stood beside her looking out at Broken Ridge Canyon, where she'd nearly died. It's strange being here. Seeing it from this angle, understanding what you could see, what you had to calculate. The distance seems impossible. It's just math and practice, Laura said. And accepting that sometimes impossible is all you've got. When I joined the Marines, I wanted to honor Danny's memory by following in his footsteps. I thought that meant being fearless, never backing down, proving I was as tough as he was. Madison's voice was thoughtful, but after everything that happened, I understand now that honoring him means something different. It means making hard choices, protecting people around me, and accepting help when I need it. Danny wasn't just tough. He was human. Acknowledging that doesn't diminish what he did. It makes it more meaningful. Laura nodded, feeling the truth of Madison's words resonate. For so long, she'd held Danny up as some impossible standard she'd failed to reach. But he'd been human, too. Brave and skilled and deeply good, yes, but also someone who'd made a choice in a split second that cost him everything. Honoring that choice meant living in a way that justified his sacrifice, not punishing herself for surviving it. They spent an hour at Echo Point, taking photographs, eating the lunch they'd packed, talking about everything and nothing. When they finally started back down, Laura felt lighter than she had in years. NH phone rang halfway down the trail. Dr. Graham, Laura, I hope I'm not interrupting your hike, but I want to let you know I've been asked to testify at a review board next month about PTSD protocols and discharge recommendations. Your case came up as an example of someone who successfully transitioned to civilian life despite significant trauma. Would you be comfortable if I shared some details of your journey? Obviously, I'd maintain confidentiality about specifics, but the board needs to understand that recovery isn't linear and return to traumatic stimuli isn't always destructive. Laura thought about the question about what her story might mean for other veterans struggling with similar issues. Yes, share what you think is helpful. If my experience can help someone else find their way through, that matters more than privacy. Thank you. And Laura, I'm proud of how far you've come. When we started therapy 3 years ago, you could barely talk about Dai's death without dissociating. Now you're mentoring his sister and building relationships with Marines who remind you of what you've lost. That's tremendous growth. And I had good help. And I was forced to confront things I'd been avoiding. Laura smiled. Turns out sometimes the universe doesn't let you hide forever. Sometimes the universe is wise that way. And SIX months passed. Laura's cabin renovation was complete, better than it had been before the attack. She had expanded the business, hired 2 part-time guides to help with the growing demand for wilderness experiences, and she'd accepted the FBI consultant position, working 3 cases in remote areas where her specific skills proved invaluable. And beauty, the work that meant most to her was quieter. Weekly dinners with Tyler and his fiancée, monthly coffee with Dr. Graham, regular hikes with Madison and Cameron when their duties allowed. She'd even started attending the local veterans group that met at Pinewood Community Center, sharing her experiences and listening to others who understood the complicated journey from service to civilian life. On a crisp autumn morning, Laura received an unexpected package. Inside was a medal, the Navy Cross, and a letter from the Secretary of the Navy. And the letter explained that after review of classified mission reports and testimony from Captain Moore and others, her actions 3 years ago in Afghanistan had been reassessed. The mission failure had been attributed to faulty intelligence from compromised sources, not operator error. Laura's conduct under fire, including her efforts to protect her spotter and her successful extraction despite overwhelming enemy forces, had been deemed exemplary. The Navy Cross was awarded to Sergeant Daniel Harper, and citations for valor were being issued to Staff Sergeant Laura Sheffield. There was more. An official apology for the inadequate support following the mission, acknowledgement that Laura's PTSD had been service-related and deserving of better care, and an invitation to attend a ceremony where Danny's family would receive his medal. Laura sat at her kitchen table, holding the letter and crying, not from grief this time, but from something more complex. Relief that the record had been corrected, validation that she hadn't failed as completely as she believed, and gratitude that Danny's sacrifice was finally being recognized properly. NSH called Madison immediately. Did you hear about the Navy Cross? Just got the call from Mom. We're all so proud. Laura, Danny deserves this recognition, and so do you. Madison's voice was thick with emotion. Will you come to the ceremony? It would mean everything to our family if you were there. I'll be there. I promise. NTH ceremony was held at Marine Corps Base Quantico. Formal and moving. Di's parents received his Navy Cross with quiet dignity, their faces showing pride mixed with eternal grief. Madison stood beside them in full dress uniform, composed and strong. When Laura's name was called and she was presented with her citation, she walked forward feeling the weight of every eye in the room. Captain Moore was there along with Cameron, Deputy Cole, and even Special Agent Morrison. Tyler sat in the front row beaming with pride. Empty citation praised her tactical decisions, her courage under fire, and her commitment to protecting her fellow Marines, even at great personal cost. It mentioned nothing about the events in Cascade Ridge. Those were still under review, technically separate from her military service, but everyone in the room knew the full story. And after the ceremony, Danny's mother approached Laura. They'd never met before. Laura had deliberately avoided the family after the funeral, unable to face their grief. "Thank you for being with Danny at the end," Mrs. Harper said, taking Laura's hands. "And thank you for watching over Madison last month. You protected both my children. That means more than I can express." Laura found her voice. "Danny was the best partner I ever had, and Madison is becoming an exceptional Marine. You raise remarkable people. Mrs. Harper, call me Patricia, please. And I hope you'll consider yourself part of our family now." Danny would have wanted that. The reception afterward was bittersweet, celebrating heroism while acknowledging the cost it often required. Laura found herself surrounded by Marines sharing stories, asking about her current work, expressing respect for the path she'd chosen. It felt like coming home to a place she'd been afraid to return to, only to discover the door had been open all along. And as the evening wound down, Laura stepped outside for air. Madison joined her, and they stood together, watching the sun set over the base. "And I've been thinking," Madison said, "about what comes next. I'm up for promotion soon, and I'm considering putting in for scout sniper training, following in Danny's footsteps completely." "That's a hard road," Laura said carefully. "I know, but I think it's my road. And I was hoping if I get selected, would you be willing to mentor me? Not officially. Just someone I can talk to who understands what the training means, what the job requires. Someone who knew Danny and can help me honor his memory the right way." Laura looked at the young woman beside her, so much like her brother, but also entirely herself, and felt something shift into place. A sense of purpose that went beyond survival or redemption. A chance to pass on knowledge to someone who would use it wisely, who understood both the power and the weight of the skills Laura could teach. "Yes," she said, "I'd be honored." That night, back in her hotel room, Laura opened her laptop and began writing. Not a mission report or an official statement, but something more personal. A letter to Danny Harper, 3 years overdue. "Dear Danny," she wrote, "I've spent 3 years apologizing to your memory for surviving when you didn't. Tonight, I'm trying something different. Thanking you. Thank you for making the choice to protect me, even though it cost you everything. Thank you for believing I was worth saving. Thank you for being the kind of person whose sacrifice meant something, whose memory inspired others, whose legacy continues through your sister and through me, and through every life we managed to protect. And I'll never stop wishing you'd survive that rooftop. I'll never stop feeling the weight of being the one who made it home. But I'm learning to carry that weight differently now. Not as a burden that crushes me, but as a responsibility to live fully enough for both of us. You were right about me having a hero complex. I can't walk away from people in trouble, but I'm learning that's not weakness. It's purpose. And maybe that purpose is exactly what you saw in me. What made you willing to sacrifice yourself so I could keep going, keep helping, keep making the hard choices. And I'm teaching your sister wilderness skills and tactical thinking. She's going to be incredible, Danny. She has your courage and determination, but she's also learning from both our mistakes. She's going to do things we never imagined. I'm not okay. Not completely. Maybe I'll never be completely okay, but I'm better. I'm building a life that honors your sacrifice by using everything you helped me become. That feels like the best way I know to say thank you. Your friend and partner Laura Ench saved the letter in a file she'd never send, but having written it felt important. A way of acknowledging growth, of marking distance, travel from the person she'd been 3 years ago to who she was becoming. Ench, our phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. Mom called. She's proud of you. We all are. Another from Captain Moore. Well done today, Sheffield. If you're ever interested in returning to active service, let me know. The Marines could use people like you. And one from Madison. Thank you for saying yes. You won't regret it. I promise to make both of you proud. Laura smiled, set the phone aside, and looked out the window at the base lights twinkling in the darkness. Tomorrow, she'd drive back to Pinewood Valley, back to her mountains and her cabin and the life she'd built. She'd continue guiding tourists through wilderness trails, consulting with the FBI on cases that needed her specific expertise, and mentoring young veterans who were navigating the difficult transition she'd made. And BUT tonight, she let herself simply be a Marine who'd served with honor, a woman who'd survived trauma and found purpose, a sniper who'd saved lives and would save more, a friend and mentor and complex human being who contained multitudes. Danny Harper had died believing she was worth saving. Laura Sheffield was finally starting to believe he'd been right, and that ultimately was a redemption she'd been searching for all along. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoy this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch. And don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.